Hey everyone, welcome to Simple and Happy. Here I share tips about simple living, organization, and productivity. Decluttering is a hot topic right now. And since we began a serious declutter of our home over 2 years ago, I've had a lot of conversations with people about the decluttering process. But I found a lot of people that I talk to know they need to declutter, but they don't know exactly how or where to get started. I want to share some tips for some of the things that I learned along the way. Number one, don't start out thinking that you need to become a minimalist or to declutter a certain percentage of things. If you start with a specific amount in mind, it will feel like an unattainable goal, and you'll likely just give up. Instead, start out with the goal to have a more peaceful space or a more peaceful home that functions better and that requires less from you. As you declutter, you'll be able to get a feel for how much farther you want to go or how much more you need to get rid of. Look at this as something that is going to serve you and make your life easier and not something that is unattainable and hard. Number two, don't start with sentimental items. This may be an obvious tip, but these things often require you to revisit the past, which sometimes can be hard. Sentimental items are often unreplaceable, and once they're gone, they're gone. As you start out to declutter, you'll get better as you go, and it will get easier as you go. You'll gain momentum. I'm not saying to skip sentimental items altogether, but don't start here and don't expect to move quickly. As I decluttered sentimental items, there were some things that weren't hard to let go of, but then there were items that were hard to let go of. I had to make multiple passes through my sentimental items before I had decluttered them to where they fit in the bin that I wanted them to. Number three, don't start with hobby items. My hobby items are where I did absolute last. There is often a lot of self-reflection that happens when you start with hobby items, and it can be a tricky process. I've talked about this in previous videos, but for me, a lot of my hobby items were from before I had kids. I had been an avid crafter. I'd had a lot more time to devote to crafting, and it was something that I really enjoyed doing, and I even had an entire room devoted to crafting. As I had kids, I had to downsize through the years as my craft room became the baby's room and as our family dynamics changed. I no longer wanted to spend my now limited free time crafting. I had kept quite a few items, but now they weren't getting used because it wasn't how I wanted to spend my time anymore. But I had kept them thinking that eventually I would get back into crafting again. Every time I saw them, I would feel guilty about the money I spent on them and how I wasn't using them. Through decluttering my craft supplies, I had to really look at that part of me that had loved crafting and realized that I didn't love it as much as I once had. And I had to be honest about the fact that that just wasn't me anymore. It was a little bit of an emotional process for me, since very often when we have a hobby, we tie some part of our identity to it. So when decluttering hobby items, you almost have to say goodbye to a part of yourself. So I was glad that I hadn't tried to start my decluttering there. And also I found that some of my hobby items were things that I had bought because I had wanted to get into a particular hobby that I no longer had interest in. I had to look inwardly and realize that I just wasn't going to be the tennis player or the card maker that I thought I would become when I purchased the items. I was glad that I had some family members that wanted a lot of my decorative paper, stamps, etc. And then I decluttered my tennis racket. I was happy that I no longer felt this pressure that I should be using these craft supplies or learning to play tennis. It was a relief to no longer feel guilty for having these hobby items that I wasn't even using. Once I decluttered so many of the hobby items for hobbies I wasn't even interested in doing anymore, I kind of felt like I'd hit a reset button, and I'm kind of still in that phase. I realize now more than ever before that I have limited time and I can't do it all. I'm experimenting with different hobbies and seeing what it is that I really love doing. I know that I really love gardening, so that's one thing I'm going to put energy and resources into. I've been experimenting with gardening for the past 5 years, and I already have a garden spot, so I'm going to lean into that more. This is a hobby I have experimented with, and every year really asked myself at the end of the gardening season if that was something that I had really enjoyed doing. And it was. So while I know that I enjoy gardening, I still want to keep things that I have for this hobby under control. The thing about gardening is that I can acquire as much or as little as I want. Gardening in its true form really only requires dirt, seeds, and water. Obviously, we like to make it a little bit more comfortable, so we like to have the drip system, the foam knee pad, the comfortable shovels, etc. This has allowed me to see what it is I really want to do as far as hobbies go. Number four, don't get held up with selling items. I'm not saying you should only donate items and not sell anything, But remember that something that you once paid money for, maybe a lot of money for, isn't always going to sell for what you think it's worth. If you want to sell something, do your best to do so. But if it isn't selling, consider donating it. It isn't doing you any good sitting around your house, and if it isn't selling, don't let it be the cause for cluttering up your home. My husband and I had to donate a lot of things that were worth money because either they weren't selling or because we just needed to get them out of the house so that we could progress with our decluttering. Recently, one of my neighbors proposed a neighborhood-wide yard sale. We would each put everything we wanted to sell in our own driveways, and people could conveniently go from house to house to shop multiple yard sales with one stop. The neighbor who proposed this did all of the advertising, including cute signs directing people to our neighborhood, as well as graphics for each of us to share on our own social media. It was such a great idea. I wouldn't have hosted the yard sale myself, but since my neighbor had kindly volunteered to take lead on everything, I figured, why not? I would put out items I was about to donate anyway and just see what sold. What didn't sell, I would just take to the donation center afterwards. Over the course of the week, I spent a few hours sorting things by the price I would sell them by and getting everything set up. Over the course of the 3-hour yard sale, I had 6 customers, 3 of whom were my own neighbors, and I sold 8 items. I had a lot more than that to sell. Here's my point. If I would have gotten held up on selling all of my items instead of just donating, all of these items would have come back into my house until I could do another yard sale or find some other way to sell these items. Yard sales can be great, and I understand that sometimes there is a need to recoup some of the money that you spent. But if you get held up on selling items, they will likely stay in your house, contributing to clutter and not serving you at all. Once the yard sale was over, we filled my husband's car yet again and took it to the donation center. As much as a little extra money would have been nice, I'm hopeful that at least the items will be a blessing to someone who couldn't afford to buy them at full price. Number 5, don't focus on how much money you spent on an item. It may be true that you overpaid or that you wasted your money, but none of that is helpful and none of it is going to put the money back in your bank account. Try to focus on how much better your home will feel with less things. Count it as a lesson learned toward being even more intentional with your future purchasing. Number 6, don't get hung up on having the same amount of items as someone else. Maybe someone else recommends you only have 2 pairs of socks, but you feel you need to have 6. Figure out what is a reasonable amount for you and stick with that. I have found that I like to keep things based on how often I want to clean them. For example, I don't want to have to wash dishes more than once a day, so I have the place settings for everyone in my family for the course of a day. That being said, I also love the habit I've gotten into of running the dishwasher every evening, so I don't keep more place settings than just what we would use in one day. Number 7, don't get hung up on, but this is still perfectly good. In all honesty, this one still gets to me sometimes. I will go to declutter something and that phrase goes through my mind. If you were raised like I was, we were taught to not waste. And it's a concept I try to teach to my kids too. However, when something doesn't serve you, you have 2 choices. You can let it continue to float around your house, adding to the clutter, or you can let it go in the name of having less to take care of. Just because something is still perfectly good does not mean it deserves a place in your home. One of the ways that I teach my kids not to waste is to be intentional about purchases, to spend money on things that we really want and not to get caught up in impulse purchases. This is a process for kids, and they have the autonomy to spend their own money, but we have a lot of conversations with our kids about buying things that will last and that we will still love after the newness wears off. And in all honesty, I think that's a good lesson for us as adults to remember too. Now, for some things that I do recommend doing. Number 1, do start with quantifiable areas. A junk drawer or closet that is a pain point for you every time you open it, and therefore you know it needs to be decluttered. Your pantry or your kitchen is a great place to start because you are less likely to have sentimental attachment to items, but rather you can part with them because you can objectively see that you haven't used these items in a long time, or you just aren't going to use these items at all. Number 2, do differentiate between items that truly add value and items that you use just because they're there. We live in a convenience world, and there are so many items that we have that we don't truly need. And while I'm not proposing that we only keep what is absolutely essential, do aim to have less of the things in your home that don't add value. It's a common statistic that people in general use 20% of items 80% of the time, and the remaining 80% of the items only get used 20% of the time. Don't hesitate to put some items in storage to see if you really can live without them. So many things I thought I wouldn't be able to part with, but then when I put them away for a while, I realized I didn't really miss them. Number 3, do involve your kids if you have them. I could do a whole video on the lessons that my kids have learned from us having a more clutter-free and simplified home. Kids bring in a lot of stuff. They always seem to be getting things from school, birthday parties, kids' meals, little treasures they find, etc. But involving kids in the decluttering process has helped to drive home some of the life lessons we are trying to teach them anyway. The value of money and spending intentionally, taking care of what you have, being content with what you have, making good decisions, just to name a few. I've personally been surprised at what my kids can do as far as decluttering goes. I don't throw away my kids' special things without their permission, but I do put parameters around the amount of things that can be kept. I have loved watching my kids become better decision makers as they've learned to decide what things they want to keep and which things they don't want to keep. Number 4, do get the items out of your house. Once you decide to get rid of things, get them out of your house. The longer they stick around your home, the more you'll convince yourself that you shouldn't get rid of them. If there are items you aren't sure if you'll need, you can put them in a box with a date on it. If you're familiar with the minimalists, they have a seasonality rule that if you haven't used it in the past 90 days and you won't use it in the next 90 days, then you can probably part with it. Sometimes we need to take the item out of circulation for 90 days and see how life would be without it. However, these type of things should be the exception and not the rule. For us, we would put the items we were decluttering in my husband's car. He uses his car fairly infrequently, so doing this was an easy way to get it out of the house. We don't live too far from a donation center, but for us it made more sense to fill up the car and then take it because we were decluttering so much so frequently. If you don't live close to a donation center or simply want to help others in your community, get creative and see if there's any kind of an organization that may be in need of the items that you're donating. I know people who have made donations to a women's shelter, homeless shelter, or even another organization that needs those items also. I would suggest taking the time to either get the items to someone who needs them or making regular trips to a donation center. Getting items out of your home will allow you to experience the freedom that comes with having less. The sooner you can experience that, the more momentum you will gain, which will help you declutter even more. Number 5, do allow yourself to soak in how good a newly decluttered area feels. Whether it's a drawer or a shelf or a closet or an entire room, take time to admire it and how good it feels. This is highly reinforcing for our brains. I still do this often, especially after I declutter an area. Number 6, do keep going. Decluttering can be a long and emotional process, but one that I can personally promise will be worth it in the end. Be gentle with yourself as you're likely getting rid of things that you once loved, but also gently push yourself to keep going. Keep the end goal in sight of having a home that requires less from you. Our homes need to work for us and to be a retreat for us. Number 7, do remember that decluttering is an ongoing process. As someone who has been working for over 2 years to have a home that has been thoroughly decluttered, I can personally attest to the fact that I still take items to the donation center. I still have to watch for clutter creeping in, and I still have to keep my guard up so I don't let things in my home that don't deserve to be there. I would love to hear what advice you would give to someone who is just starting out on their decluttering journey. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And please feel free to share with someone who needs a little bit of motivation to get started. Thanks for watching, friends. Have a great day.